the cloud. And we're also going to go live on Facebook. I will go to my timeline here. Give me a second. All right. Okay, perfect. All right, we're good. So real quick, let me share my desktop. Here we go. So Mind, actually Mind just received $41 million in investment capital today. They just announced that today. So obviously doing something right. They're in the property management business. They use technology and a lot of good stuff to do property management. Bill is one of our sponsors, but he's also our speaker. He's the go-to person for anything related to self-directed IRA. He can speak. He's been in the business for a very long time. He knows it inside out. My own investments that are self-directed IRA investments are with the Entrust Group. Excellent customer support. And they're local. They're in the Oakland area. So, so thank you, Bill. And also Fourplex Investment Group. They do new construction. They just announced a project in Phoenix, but they're in a lot of A neighborhoods. They stick to like prime real estate, prime schools, prime areas, but they only build fourplexes. But I noticed that in Phoenix, they're doing a triplex and a fourplex combo. But the idea is that maybe one day when you retire, you live in one of the fourplexes and you rent out the other three. So really good ROI. Hamlin, great CEO, great presenters. We've had them about a month ago, Dana. Again, it's self-management, but using some incredible tools to do property management. Ria, thanks for joining us today. Go ahead and unmute yourself, turn on the camera, and let us hear from you.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, hello everyone. It's always a pleasure to be in the company of my sister Yana and Bobby. You guys are the dynamic duo out here in real estate and educating us all. So I'm happy to be here and support. As far as our business here, I'm the broker owner of Cotton Realty. We cover various different counties in Northern California. I'm specifically in Alameda. I have agents in Solano, Contra Costa, as well as Central Valley. And the market right now is really hot. I had a 30,000 over list price offer on a Vallejo property within 48 hours. So a sign of the times. And
can I borrow $5, Ria?
I should be asking that from you. I have tuition to pay. You have a daughter with a full ride scholarship. But always a pleasure, and happy to be here and learn what you guys have to offer today.
Thank you so much, Ria. Thank you so much. I know, do send us, if you've posted that deal in Vallejo, if it's online, send it to us. I have a little battle going on with the investors in Texas. They think our market is going to crash, and I'm like, no, it's not. It's still going strong. So I had a listing in San Jose. I got 26 offers, and 5 of them were all cash. And literally in 3 weeks, they had over 26 offers. So I posted that on the group. So anyway, we have a little friendly competition going on.
Okay, I'll send it over.
All right. All right. And for mortgage loans, conventional, Alexandra is our sponsor. She's really great. She does all of my loans, refinances. Swamped right now, like anybody else that's good in the business. Oleg is her business partner, and he does a lot of my insurance for my rental properties. You can reach out to me and I'll introduce you guys, or you can reach out to them directly. Breakthrough Builders, they focus mainly on new construction, high-end new construction. They're also a sponsor. And so Kamal has actually spoken. And actually, Skylight is also one of our sponsors. And Josh, and Josh will tell you his story, the company story. I won't steal the thunder, but they're just incredible. And lastly, we do have Habitat. Can you see Habitat? Let me see. If I can. But Habitat is our ADU. They presented yesterday. So James and Eric from Habitat, they're also our sponsors. I believe in the ADU model because I think with the housing shortage and just getting creative, it's a great ROI, but it's also good for people in general, but it's a good investment as well. So if you need to talk to Eric or James, reach out to me and I'll put you in touch, or reach out to Yana. All right. With that, so a common friend of ours, I worked with him for a long time, just a great guy. He introduced me to Josh and Jasper. We talked briefly. We had a quick Zoom meeting. We haven't met in person, but I feel like I know Josh pretty well. Yes. But I was so impressed by what they had developed, what they were doing, a kind of disruptive. As a real estate rehabber, you know, besides all the challenging issues with the city and the permits and the capital requirement, there's also the contractor unknowns. There's a lot of uncertainty around contractors and their dependability and their how expensive they've gotten. So Skylight came along. They're looking to solve a lot of those stressful things that happen in the life of a rehabber, flipper, homeowner. They're looking to solve a lot of those issues with process and technology. So I'm gonna leave it at that. But Josh, thank you for making the time. Thank you for supporting us. And the stage, the digital stage, is all yours. So take it from there.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Good to be talking to everyone. And I'll actually focus more on the topic than on overviewing Skylight and what we do, but happy to talk to anyone afterwards about the company. And I've shared a little bit and easy enough to get to skylight.com. I'm gonna just share my screen here. And
we can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to focus today on a topic that's going to be near and dear to many of your hearts. And if it's not near and dear to your heart, I'm not sure if you've done a real estate investment on a property before, which is renovation, or sorry, rather one that requires a renovation at that. The topic is going to be renovation and specifically thinking through a bit of a framework and some pointers for estimating the cost of a renovation or a rehab. Again, my name is Josh. I'm from Skylight. I'll go into a little bit of context first, just so you know where my views and my background comes from and where this information comes from. We'll talk through a framework and a way to think about estimating costs in a renovation. And for folks who want some of the follow-up material to do it themselves, Yana and Bobby are going to have a follow-up spreadsheet that you can use, so you don't have to worry about absorbing all the detail. We'll share some project examples because I think it's important to actually get to brass tacks and have a look at a couple things and make it real. And then as a little bit of a bonus, we'll talk about how to make sure that you avoid being one of those disaster projects, the horror stories that people talk about at dinner tables and that make people afraid to do renovations in the first place. So starting with who is Skylight, I'll keep this part nice and brief. We are a reading GC here in the Bay Area. And as Bobby alluded to, we are also a technology startup. And so we actually started up a few years ago on the premise that renovations could be reimagined from the ground up, from first principles, and can be done better with predictability, with greater efficiency, and therefore lower costs for homeowners and investors, and with a lot less work. These renovations can be like a second job, and they don't have to be. So we offer a full turnkey service. Clients are primarily busy homeowners who want to upgrade their space, but don't really have the time. Well, we take everything off their hands. For investors that we work with, right, folks who don't want to micromanage everything and be involved in every detail so they can do more investments or maintain a day job. We take care of design, sourcing, permits, construction. In some cases, our clients don't even step foot on the property over the course of construction, and we share all their updates through photo and video. We do focus on interior remodel and specialize on kitchens and bathrooms. But we do, as you'll see when I get to the examples, we do sort of full condo, full house remodel as well. We just don't do the exterior, just to give some context. And we have not yet raised a $41 million venture capital funding round. So hats off to the folks at Mind for that milestone. But we have done the inverse. We raised $14 million of venture capital funding so far to create this better renovation firm, this better renovation experience. And so I'll talk about some of our learnings and some of our thinking for how we plan out the costs and the budgets for a project. I do not intend to go into a lot of detail here because that can get really boring and really overwhelming really quickly. But again, we'll follow up with all that. You can always give us a call and we give quotes within 24 or 48 hours anyways. Right off the bat, it's helpful to get a sense of, and I have to move everyone's face out of the way of my page here. It's helpful to get a sense of what actually makes up a budget. And this is going to be basics for some people, but it's important not to miss some of the components. A typical remodel, most of the money is going to go to the labor, the rough materials, and the finishes. No surprise about that. But you also have to factor in, are you paying for design, architecture, interior design? If you're taking out walls, you're probably going to need structural engineering. If you're doing seismic retrofit, you're going to need some assessment there. And then, of course, the city's got to take their pound of flesh. And so you got to budget for permits as well. We'll focus on things that drive the labor and rough material and the finish costs here primarily, including in the follow-up material. But just be aware that all of these components are important, and people have a nasty surprise when they forget about one of them and then all of a sudden have to take care of those. So we think about 3 different categories of renovation. And when you're looking at a property, whether it's one that you own that you're thinking of upgrading or you're assessing a potential deal, you want to get a sense pretty quickly of what kind of project you're talking about. What are you thinking of doing here? Is it a light project or is it sort of a full gut, a full major remodel? We think about 3 major categories for interior projects, right? So take out additions and things like that. This is for interiors. Remove and replace is the most straightforward. We're basically giving the space a facelift. We're not moving any fixtures. We're not adding another sink, more lights. We're just making the space look bright, new fixtures, new faucets, new shower heads, new tile. It will work better at the end of it. It won't just look better, but we're not fundamentally reorganizing the space. Then we talk about layout changes, and those can be minor or major, right? In a lot of cases, we can get a lot of value by just making some minor changes. We don't have to move walls. We don't have to move too many major fixtures around, like toilets. We like to avoid moving if you don't have to, because the drain lines are so big and expensive to move. And then we do have the major layout changes where you want to really reimagine the space. You're moving walls, you're borrowing from closets to make a bathroom bigger, you're changing the size of different rooms to actually fundamentally reimagine the space in a way that you feel is going to make it better for you as an owner or more valuable for buyers or renters as an investor. And we always think that it's important to tailor the type of project you take on to the context of your investment. So when we work with folks who are investing in a property, that's really important so that we can help guide towards the right kind of scope. If you're doing a flip, you want to add a lot more value to the property so that the people who come see it and think about buying it see something that almost doesn't resemble the thing that you purchased and is just a totally different ballgame. So we most likely are going to avoid a simple facelift unless that is going to go a really long way, or you want to have a very short holding period, or the market's incredibly hot. I won't get into the tactics or strategies for investors. I'll leave that to Yana and Bobby. But we typically won't do that for a flip. We do a layout change. Often we do a major layout change, move walls around, totally reimagine the space. Sometimes we do a smaller layout change. On the other end of the spectrum, if you have a rental, you're probably not going to get great ROI from moving every wall, creating new bathrooms where there weren't bathrooms before, totally reimagining the space. And so we want to think about tailoring the size to the context. So now let's talk a little bit about how you can think about estimating the cost of a project, actually getting into it when you're starting from scratch and needing to just build yourself up. We think that it's really important to have a framework for assessing the cost of a project, which is really assessing the scope that a project needs to have, and then understanding what you have to pay for that scope, for the things that need to be done. And I've tried to keep it simple here. We have some pretty complicated estimating tools that are simple to use, but complicated in the back end. I won't go into a ton of detail here again, but as long as we keep it relatively simple, you can head into a project, start preparing your assessment of what the rehab, what the renovation is going to cost, and not get too overwhelmed. Because you get too overwhelmed, you might not even do the deal in the first place, and that's not going to help anybody. That's not going to help you. That's not going to help you make any progress as an investor. So to think about a simple framework, we think about the bones, the guts, and the heads, arms, and legs of the home. So the bones are the foundation and structure, and you want to assess when you're looking at a property and trying to understand what the costs are going to be. What kind of changes do you need to make to the foundation and the structure? And the answer could be none. In fact, for a lot of our projects, it is none. We tend to stay away from major foundation upgrades and things like that. But if you need to do them, then you want to identify that pretty quickly, because that's going to give you a sense of this is going to be a big project. This is going to be a major undertaking. In terms of the guts, you'll probably need to make some mechanical, electrical, and plumbing changes anytime you do a renovation, unless it really is just a facelift. But you want to understand if you're going to have to change any of the core systems and make major upgrades there, because those can be really big cost drivers. Those can be, high 4 and low 5-figure things, whereas minor changes to move a faucet around or something can be a lot less than that. And then only once we've assessed the major upgrades that are going to give you a sense of, is this a really big project, or is this more about the layout and the finishes, would we get into the detail of thinking about the layout and finishes and pricing those out and getting estimates for those. So I want to give you a little bit of a preview of some of the signals that you can look for when you walk through a property, when you get a virtual tour, however you're getting your chance to assess the space. On foundation and structural repairs, the number one thing that we're going to look out for is cracks. Cracks are a sign that the house is slipping, it's not stable. They're not always going to mean that that's the case, but they're a good sign to watch out for. And they manifest themselves in a few different ways. So when you see long straight cracks, that's going to give you a bit of a different clue than if there's a little chip in the tile and someone maybe dropped a bowl or something like that. So when we see these long cracks, whether it's the drywall, it might mean that the drywall is getting pulled apart as the house slides on its foundation. Often you'll find that at the corner of doors or openings where the drywall has a corner in it, and therefore it's a little bit of a weak point. If you see tile cracking on the floor or the wall and it's a big long crack like this, it can mean the floor is really unlevel and the tile is starting to separate. If you're walking around and the floor feels unlevel or a stairway is really unlevel, that's actually the case where I am now. And I thought, gee, I'm really glad that I don't have to repair the foundation here. And then, of course, if you look at the foundation, it's visibly damaged, then you know that something could be coming up and it might need to be something that could be addressed. When we talk about the guts, the mechanical and electrical and plumbing systems, there's a lot more to look out for, at least from Skylight's point of view, on the electrical side than on the plumbing and mechanical. So electrical gets its own page. Things that you want to look for are signs that you might have to rewire the whole house, which can get quite expensive and is a bit of an undertaking, or signs that you might need to upgrade the electrical service, which could require PG&E if you're in California, or the utility if you're in a different state that's going to actually create additional service coming to the house and require digging and things like that. These aren't necessarily a sign that the project is a bad one to take on. In fact, the more work you can take on, often the more value you can create for a buyer. But it is going to be a signal that it's going to be, one of the bigger projects. So if you find fuse boxes like this instead of electrical panels like this, that's a signal that you've got some pretty old electrical systems that might require a rewire. If you're seeing knob and tube exposed, whether you're peeking in the attic or you see it in the garage or somehow you come across it somewhere else in the house, often when you're getting into electrical upgrades, that's going to have to be replaced and wires rerun. And then one of my favorite signals, just because of the pure aesthetic of it, is these two-pronged outlets. I like to call them the sad outlets because the mouth is missing in the outlet that kind of looks like a face shape. And that tells you that it's not grounded and you might need to run some grounding. So these are some of the signals, and there's a couple others here, that you might need to make some electrical system upgrades. Again, that shouldn't necessarily scare you off from the project, but you want to make sure that you don't miss that when you're estimating so that you get the budgeting right. A couple of things on the plumbing and mechanical side. If you find steel pipes, there's a good chance that in the course of the project, you're going to want to replace those. So again, find them, understand that that's there. They're relatively straightforward to replace, but you want to make sure that you're factoring them in. Some common sense things. You should always test all of the faucets, all of the showers, whether it's the kitchen sink, bathrooms, and make sure that the water's running. And if it's not, you want to think about why that is and whether that might require some upgrades to the plumbing systems of the house. And then just a small one on the mechanical side, if you see things like there's no fan in the bathroom, that's going to require a change, relatively small change, but it's something to keep in mind and make sure that you have a note to address that. If you see that you're going to need to upgrade the furnace or something like that, you want to just be able to account for that and understand what new venting and ducting you're going to have to run. When we get to part 3, which is the layout changes, the fixtures, the finishes, there's so much detail there that I really don't want to get into a lot of the specifics, but it's helpful to have a checklist. It's helpful to have that well organized and to make sure that you can always do your first order estimates by just having a sense of what you might think about spending per square foot, or just thinking about what the major items are that are involved in the project. But when you really get down to it, you want to have a checklist to make sure you don't miss anything.
Is it?
Oh,
Can we have everybody mute, please?
there we go.
Thank
Looks like
you.
you got muted. And so Yana and Bobby will have this more detailed version of this as a follow-up for anyone who wants to check in with them and get a spreadsheet that they can use as a tool to plan your own project and do the budgeting for that. One of the things you'll have to get right and just develop a basic intuition for is having the right units so that you can measure the right things. So whether it's faucets, where obviously the number of faucets is the thing that matters, flooring, where you need to know the square footage, cabinetry, where you want to know the linear feet. These are relatively straightforward. They're all going to be broken out and shared in the spreadsheet that you'll have access to. But how do you get those dimensions? So I wanted to share a little trick of the trade. We find that having a floor plan, and for our purposes, when we actually get into planning a project, having a 3D model of the space that we can put into an architectural program is really helpful. I think that for a basic estimating, a floor plan is going to be good enough. The next level up, the extra credit, we could say, is to create a 3D model for people who know how to work with those, or who are working with an architect or designer or contractor who knows how to use those. So if you just want to create a floor plan, we've actually been using an app that's really, really easy both to download and to use, and it's pretty good. It's called Cubicasa. You can get it on an iPhone, you can get it on Android, and basically it coaches you through taking a video, and then they have a magical machine in the background that probably involves some people also checking it that turns that into a floor plan. So this is an example of a floor plan created from taking a 3-minute video, just walking around the space. And I think that one way that you can get an edge in understanding what you need to budget for a project quickly is by getting things like that, where if a listing doesn't have a floor plan or doesn't have a Matterport tour, you can actually create something like that for yourself for $20 or $30. The next level up is relatively sophisticated. Skylight does this for all of our projects when we do the design and the planning. This is called Canvas, and as you can see, you actually need a sensor that you have to buy from them, and then that allows you to create in a few minutes a full 3D model that's going to show every light fixture, every outlet, every light switch, every window, the trim on the window, all the details that you would need to do full plans. Okay, so that is the section on thinking about the framework for approaching doing an estimate. I thought it would be helpful and interesting to folks to share some project examples. So let's get into it. First one here is a bathroom that we did in South San Francisco. Here, this was a young family who wanted a bath tub for a baby that was coming on the way. This falls into the category of a minor layout change. So a few things, right? We've changed the shower to a tub, which involves a little bit of plumbing infrastructure work. We actually changed the order or the layout of the fixtures. So we swapped the vanity for the toilet here. And you can see there's just, whoops. You can see there's just a sort of brighter, lighter overall aesthetic meant for the 2020s and not for the whatever year this was. To give you a sense for budget, and budgets are going to vary by neighborhood, by zip code, by town. But just to give a sense of this one, the budget was $25,000, $600. That's all in permits, materials, everything. The final cost was the same. At Skylight, we never introduce unforeseen costs and pass them on to the homeowner. If we have to spend more to get the job done, we actually absorb that. So the final cost was the budget. And construction on this one took 4 weeks. So just to have another look at it, this was full bathroom remodel, 4 weeks, about $25,000. Just to help you sort of develop some intuition.
What size was that bathroom, someone asked?
This one was about 8 by 5, so roughly 40 square feet. The one thing I'll say to whoever asked that question is, per square foot rule of thumb guesses can be helpful in some contexts. I would say that in a bathroom, it is quite unhelpful in that so much of the bathroom work is related to the shower, the toilet, the vanity, that if the bathroom is 40 square feet or 60 or 70 square feet, often the cost difference is much less than you might think. So small bathrooms can be more expensive than people think. Big bathrooms can actually be less expensive than people think unless you're moving a lot of things around. Next one here is a kitchen in San Mateo. We would consider this one on the border between a minor and a major layout change. So on the left here, you can see we have a very, very old school kitchen. We've got a window here. We've got these old wooden cabinets, nice linoleum floors. This is actually a wall. Then we can see here, this picture is taken just as we were putting the final touches on. This wall is gone, replaced with a nice big peninsula. We've actually, if we go back one, we've filled in this window to create more space for a fridge and pantry cabinetry, put in a nice farmhouse sink. And to give you a sense for this one, budget was about $55,000, which was also the final cost, as it always is. This one took a little bit longer and actually did experience a couple delays. I'll talk about that in a second. This one was about 2 to 3 months construction, a little bit closer to 3 than 2. And what happened in this one was actually the engineer's original assessment was that this was not a structural wall. When we opened it up, it actually turned out to be, so the engineer had to come back and we had to go back to the city, get that cleaned up and make sure that it was safely built. This one's a bit of a bigger project. We didn't move walls around, but we did a lot more work and completely transformed the space here. This is in San Francisco, in the city, in the dog patch. It's a loft. We completely rebuilt the kitchen to turn it from a college student's dorm kitchen to a proper entertaining space. We updated both of the bathrooms, not the showers, but updated the finishes elsewhere. And so we worked in all of those spaces. Here we had to run plumbing and electrical to create everything that we needed for this island here. You can't see it, but there's also a built-in microwave. So we had to do a bit of work to route that and then create all the space for the outlets and the dry bar here, including the wine fridge. If we go through here, this one, to be honest, these guys got a really good price for the amount of work that they got. This one was budgeted at $88,000, and that's what we charged them. And that one took 3 months. It was a little more involved to move all the plumbing and deal with the building because it was a bigger condo building. Trying to think if there's any other detail on that one. I don't know if there are any questions on any of those examples, but those are my examples.
Nice work, Josh.
I didn't swing any of the hammers, but I am thankful to the folks who did. Okay, last section here, and this is where we'll get into a little bit of what we think of as Skylight's secret sauce, because a lot of people talk about renovation horror stories and having sort of disaster projects. And part of the reason that we started the company in the first place is to make those not happen anymore. And make people feel like renovations are approachable and, I won't say light, but fun and relatively easy and straightforward and predictable. So a lot of that happens when you create a really good plan and a really detailed plan. And I want to sort of make a plug for why it's so important to have a really good plan before you rush into construction, before you actually start the work. So the first one is pretty straightforward. If you've been involved with any project ever, you know that if there's a good plan, it goes more smoothly and that makes it more efficient. People have to spend less time, less money gets spent. That's great. I do want to talk about what we often see in renovations, which we call as death by 1,000 cuts, and how little things that happen day in and day out during the project really compound and can really kill a project. And then the last point is actually really important. A lot of people take the point of view that they'll figure it out when the walls are down. They'll figure it out partway through the project. And I think that it's important for people to understand that anything that you do in a renovation will cost you more if you decide to do it after construction starts than if you decide to do it before construction starts. And I'll get into reasons why that is and close there. So to talk about death by 1,000 cuts, this is just a small sampling of some of the things that can happen in a project that can throw things a little bit off track, that can add a little bit of time, that can result in you as the investor or the owner getting a call in the middle of your workday saying that they need a decision from you and you're holding them up and they're going to be delayed and you're going to have costs building up if you don't tell them right away. Lots of things can happen on a project, and even a well-planned project will have some issues, but it'll have a lot fewer. And often when we hear really desperate homeowners or investors who have had a project go really wrong, it's not one thing that they can point to. And in fact, they're exhausted and confused and bewildered because they don't understand why their project went from 100, which is just a silly made up number. No project costs $100, of course, to 180 or 150 or 200. They don't even know why, because it wasn't any one decision. It wasn't any one problem. But day in and day out, things come up, change orders happen, incremental costs come into play, and the person who's doing the project, the investor, the owner, ends up paying for it. And so when variables are not controlled, and when we decide to make things up as we go a little bit by not having a really good plan, that results in a lot of little decisions that add a little bit of cost each time and can result in 30% over budget, 80% over budget, 100% over budget. And those are things that we want to avoid. Lastly, I do want to make the point that things do cost more if you decide to do them later than if you decide to do them earlier. And there's two reasons for that. I don't, you can't blame any contractor for either of these. They both just make sense. The first one is pretty simple, sort of business fundamentals. If you have the walls down and you're racking up costs, or you're moved out of your house, somebody has more leverage, and so they're going to charge a higher margin. That's a simple sort of fact of business. That's how the world works. That shouldn't surprise anybody. The second component is that when the project plan changes midway through, the contractor's costs actually are higher. They might have to pay someone overtime. They have to order a new material or return a material that they already bought, and that requires sending someone to the store. They might have to get designs done, go back to the city. They might have to reschedule their plumber, and then the plumber gets upset and has to charge them more, things like that. And so all of these things add up, and the bottom line is, when you haven't signed the contract yet, or you haven't started construction yet, you have a lot more leverage to make sure that there's a fair price for the things that you're doing in your project than you do after the fact.
Josh, quick question from Chinton.
Yeah.
How much does it cost to install central heating and air? And can any property type be set up with HVAC? Hard to find estimates online.
Yeah. Let's take that. Let's take that in just a second. I won't try to give an estimate there. It really depends on the circumstance of the property. Can any property have that done to it? I would say if it's a standalone home, then the answer is generally going to be yes. If it's a condo, it might get a little bit more complicated because it depends on what sort of common equipment and infrastructure there is there. In terms of pricing for a specific project or giving general guidance, I won't try to get into that. There we go. One more slide, and then we can go to any other questions that folks might have. Just to talk about what a good plan looks like. A good plan is going to have detailed construction drawings so that the laborers on site don't have to guess whether the towel rack is installed here or installed here, and they're not sitting waiting for an answer in the middle of their workday. It's going to have a thorough scope of work so that you're expecting to get the same thing that your contractor is expecting to give you. And there's very little room for sort of tension and misalignment there. You're going to have done the homework to identify what problems might come up during the project, and you're going to have a plan for those. And then this one might be a little bit controversial, but we actually feel pretty strongly that projects go a lot better when all the materials are ready and either on site or available for pickup before construction starts, so that you're not partway through the project waiting on materials. That one's a little bit different if you have an empty property and you just want to get started anyways, but if you have someone living there or you want to get the project done in as little time as possible of construction, you're going to want all the materials to be ready. So there we go. If you want to get a quote on any project or talk to us about how we work or what we do, pretty easy to find us at skylight.com or just josh@skylight.com. We do provide a full turnkey service for interior projects. We do provide detailed project plans. We do guarantee all of our budgets, but I won't spend a lot of time getting into what we do. I'll take questions from folks instead. There we go.
You guys can unmute yourselves if you have any questions for Josh. Feel free to speak up.
Jana, I've got a question. This is
Sure.
Bill Cogswell. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So Josh, so I see your three examples and I'm trying to understand exactly where you use the spreadsheet that you talked about. Is that to give an owner an estimate prior to actually giving a final quote after you've agreed upon the concept, or are the examples that you used not really ones that you would have used your spreadsheet that you showed us on one of your slides?
Right. That's a good question. Well, the spreadsheet that I put together is not exactly what we use. It's the same kind of structure as what we use to put together a price, but it's a little bit different because we built some other internal tools that our estimating team uses. But it's going to have the same building blocks. I don't know if that answers your question. So we don't use exactly that spreadsheet. We put that together for folks here based on the same sort of structure and principles, but that's not literally what we use. We have a tool that we carry around on our iPad or on a computer to be able to price out projects quickly.
Sure. Okay.
Hi, Josh.
Hello.
So I have a question. Do you guys do, I guess, add-ons to like the second floor of a residential home?
We do not do additions or add-ons. There are folks who do specialize in those bigger projects, and we've decided to stay to more sort of interior, staying within the same square footage.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Josh. I've got a question for you. I was wondering if you have any kind of a cost just a general rehab cost reference that we can use, like when we're assessing a property and say maybe it needs a light rehab versus a medium rehab, like how many dollars per square foot, for the Bay Area.
Yeah, I think so. What I've prepared already is not quite that, but it's a good question, and it's something that we could put together. I would say you wouldn't want one thing that's for the whole Bay Area, because the price of doing a project in Hayward is going to be very different from the price of doing it in Vallejo or
Atherton.
doing it in Atherton or doing it in San Francisco. But what we could do is give some general guidance on some ranges of different kinds of projects in, say, San Francisco, the Peninsula, and the South Bay, something like that. So I could put that together and share it with Yana and Bobby as a follow-up.
Okay, yeah, that would be very helpful. Just something that we can look at really quickly when we're, without having to dig really deep initially, but just something that you can just use just off the bat to see if it's even a feasible deal to go after. So,
yep.
I mean, I'll share the number that I use. I mean, typically, like Josh mentioned, every city in the Bay is going to be different pretty much. You have to think about finishes and what type of appliances you're putting in. Also, everybody's construction costs are different. But if you were to use a figure like maybe $50 per square foot for a tradition, like a typical cosmetic rehab, you probably be pretty safe unless you were in a pretty expensive area.
okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, Josh. I have a question.
Sure.
Could you speak to the price range that one should expect for urban areas like Oakland or Berkeley or Emeryville for replumbing, for redoing the entire plumbing, and also the entire electrical for a basic single-story, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1,500 square feet house?
For anything that's going to be that specific, I'd prefer to just sort of follow up with an email, and then I can get back to you with some notes on that. If that sounds good, then it's just going to be josh@skylight.com.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
no worries.
Best to just shoot on your specific project. Give him a sense of what you want done, the square footage, the city. And yeah, there's Josh's contact information. So,
And to summarize, what he kind of showed us here today was just basically what type of information you need to collect, what a checklist looks like. You can go to your own local market and do research on average price per foot, square foot, linear foot, whatever it is, and kind of get an idea of what local prices are. But he's just giving us like the strategy as to how to build a plan.
and I think Josh, maybe we'll do another seminar on some of the contractual issues that if you hire
Sure.
a contractor outside in the parking lot of Home Depot versus Skylight, what are some of the issues that people may run into as far as legal and insurance and contractual issues? But I think that's a whole topic in itself, which I know that Skylight has really taken a very professional, very proper approach to. So, yeah.
I'll give a 1-sentence preview on that one, Bobby. If you hire someone who is not licensed, then God help you if there's a leak during your project.
Exactly. So, yeah, there you go. But there's so much more to that. But yeah, so just be careful whether it's Skylight or whoever. Make sure you've got the right insurance, you've got the right workman's comp, you've got the right licensing. Sometimes they'll tell you they have a license, but they really don't. And maybe their license has been suspended. So things like that. But perfect. Well, Josh, thank you for making it succinct and compact and helpful. I think a lot of questions came up. I think a lot of folks are going to reach out to you, me, or Yana, and we'll help you. Look, the goal here, a lot of us are doing rehabs. We want to do more rehabs, but sometimes dealing with the resources, contractors is holding us back. But if there was a solution that helped us do a few more deals, that's what this is all about. So thank you. Yes, yeah, you can check online, but Very few people do that. But one question that came up, Josh, you're currently just in the Bay Area, correct? But you plan to expand to other areas?
That's right. We're in the Bay Area for now. We will be in other areas relatively soon, but I won't try to opine on whether that'll be Q4 or Q1, but relatively soon, yeah.
Sure, absolutely.
Also, Josh, how do you verify their license is good? A contractor?
Yeah. The good news if you're in California is that it's very easy. You just type into Google general contractor license check, and you'll get the California license check website, and you'll put in either the company, really you want to get their license number.
Yeah.
It's going to be like a 6-digit number. You want to check that. You'll want to see that they're in good standing. You'll want to see that you'll want to figure out if that contractor has been in business under that business name for the same number of years that they say they have been in business for. Because if they say they've been in business for 20 years and their construction entity, their business has been around for 2 years, it might mean that they got into some trouble and had to make a change to the legal structure. So the California license check is really easy. Other states might have a similar tool, and that's going to be your first step.
Part two of that same question from DC is does the GC's whole team need to be licensed, or do they fall under his license as subcontractors?
There are some nuances to this, but the general answer to that is if you have a general contractor license, and I'm only going to speak for California, and whatever caveat you need to put in here, this is not legal advice, anything like that. But in our experience, if you're a general contractor with a general contractor's license, then employees of your company can do the work and don't need to have their own license. Subcontractors that you hire do need to have their own license in their respective trade. So you need to have a licensed plumber, a licensed electrician, if you are subcontracting out to those people. And you want to make sure that if you're hiring a general contractor who's subcontracting out the electrical, the plumbing, that they're working with someone who's licensed, because otherwise you're not really covered by the GC's license.
Thank you.
Right.
Each person has to be. That would be a quite challenging bar.
Perfect. And Josh, if you want to stick around, what we'll do is we'll go to Bill, and then we'll come back, and people may have more questions later on. So if you got time, you can put us on mute, but we'll get Bill a shot at doing his presentation. He's always got some great information, some very useful content for people that are, many of you have invested in with self-directed IRA cap money into real estate. He's seen it all, so he's going to share what some of the mistakes that people make, but he's always available to educate us, to point us in the right direction. So, hey, Bill, thank you for making the time, and thanks for joining us. You're a co-host, so if you want to share anything, you're ready to rock and roll.
All right, Bobby, thanks. Yeah, let me do the share screen here and make sure. Share. Okay, you guys see the 7 mistakes real estate IRA investors make, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I mean, feel free to interrupt me with questions, whether you type them out and Bobby or Yana scream it out, but you're welcome to do that. You don't have to wait until the end. Before I do anything, I have to put this up, which essentially says that the Entrust group is not advised, right? So we don't sell any investments. We don't recommend any particular investments. We don't endorse or promote any particular investment. We're a custodian and record keeper of what are called self-directed IRAs. And I'll get, I'm guessing that a lot of you have at least some familiarity with what these are. But again, if, feel free to ask any questions. So this is what we're going to be talking about: real estate IRAs. What are some of the investment options that you can do for real estate inside a retirement account? What are the 4 mistakes that we see in retirement account investors in real estate make when choosing the properties, but it probably is a general thing. What mistakes they make when purchasing the property, then what's a prohibited transaction, disqualified persons. What are some reasons to invest in real estate in your retirement account, and then the Q&A. But again, feel free to scream it out. So this is a little bit of information about me. I've been with Entrust for a little over 9 years. I started off in a different position as a manager of franchise operations, and I was oversaw our compliance and internal audit before I went on to my current position of business development manager. And I want to point out, it's probably about 5 years ago that I moved into business development management position. And one of the first things that I did was I started going to meetup groups. I started going to a lot of different investment related meetup groups. And one of the first meetup groups that I went to was Bobby's at the time. And that was when I first met him. And where did you have that? Where you were in the back of a restaurant?
At the pub, at the the Englander pub in San Leandro.
Right, in the back room. And I went up and I said, "Hey, I'd be happy to do a presentation for you." And anyway, so Bobby and I have known each other for a long time, and what he's grown his group to turn into has been incredibly impressive. So I just want to point out that I came in at a time where Bobby was still, relatively new to this, or at least new to having the group. And fortunately I did. And we ended up becoming a sponsor, and he's had me come in to present, I don't know, half a dozen times at this point, I would say. About Entrust, we're headquartered in Oakland. We've been in business for almost 40 years. So we are not a big company, but we are an old company. We have approximately 22,000 accounts. We have coming up on $4 billion in assets. And the biggest thing that we provide compared to our competitors is our account holders get a single point of contact. So I'm in Oakland. I handle a region of the country, and then anybody that's referred by Bobby that signs up through him, they get discounted rates, and I become your point of contact. And then I have an associate, Jacob, who between the two of us, instead of just calling the 800 number, you know who to work with and who to ask questions to. Some more information about us. We focus on education. We do monthly webinars. We have a national continuing education program for realtors. If there's any realtors in the audience, we have a 2-hour, 2-credit class that we provide, but you invite us for it. We don't schedule the class. If a realtor association or realtor office wants to get these 2 CE credits for the realtors, we'll do the class. It's called The Basics of Real Estate IRAs. With that being said, what is a real estate IRA? It's not a type of IRA, it's a marketing term. It simply means that within your retirement account, you've invested in real estate. That's what we call a real estate IRA. But a real estate IRA is not a type of an IRA. A type of IRAs are a traditional IRA, Roth IRA, SEP, and Simple. And then we also have a 401k, a Coverdale Educational Savings Account, and a health savings account. Any of those accounts can be self-directed into real estate, right? And that's, a lot of people aren't aware of that. I'm hoping that most of the audience is aware of that real estate is an asset you're allowed to invest in inside a retirement account. You just have to have your account with a custodian who's willing to hold real estate as an asset, which is where Entrust comes in. So if you went to Charles Schwab, Merrill Lynch and said, "Hey, I want to go invest in this rental property," they would probably tell you you have to withdraw the money and take a distribution. They might tell you you have to transfer it over or roll it over to a self-directed custodian. But that's what you have to do. You have to roll it or transfer it over to a company like Entrust who's willing to hold real estate. What kind of real estate can you invest in? All of it. The only thing you can't invest in is your own property. You can't invest in something that's going to be for personal use. But in terms of what you can invest in that we broadly call real estate, not only properties, but also notes, tax liens, trust deeds, beyond real estate, precious metals, private placements, promissory notes. We've had people invest in the cannabis space and cryptocurrency. We had somebody invest in a racehorse and cattle in a bowling alley. You can invest in almost anything you want inside a retirement account. You just need, again, a custodian who's willing to hold whatever asset it is that you want to invest in. And Entrust is willing to hold any asset that you want to invest in as long as the transaction that you want to make isn't specifically prohibited by the Internal Revenue Code. And I'm going to get into some what are considered prohibited transactions based on the Internal Revenue Code. These are the only asset classes you're not allowed to invest in inside a retirement account. collectibles, life insurance, and companies that are established as S corporations. So you can invest in LLCs, limited partnerships, C corps, anything like that, but you can't invest in S corps. And then obviously collectibles, so any work or art. So you can invest in an art gallery, but you can't own actual art. You could invest in a winery, but you can't own actual wine, right? So one's considered a collectible, the other one is considered an investment, a business. Same thing. I mentioned cannabis. It's a growing investment space that people are investing in. You can invest in a cannabis business, but you can't invest in actual cannabis. You can't buy weed and hold it inside your retirement account. All right. So let's get into, the meat of this, which is what do we, sort of mistakes that we see when people are looking to invest in real estate inside. We're focusing specifically on what we see inside retirement accounts. But again, this may apply in general for people who are doing investments in investment property. So the first thing, neglecting to do a thorough inspection of the property. We get sometimes people who are investing in properties that are turnkey rentals, right? So they're buying a property that is already rented out. It's got a tenant in place. It's got a property manager in place, and they're using their IRA to buy this, and their IRA is immediately going to start receiving rental income. Oftentimes out of state, particularly here in California, it might be tough to find that. So people are looking in places like Ohio, Indiana, places like that. Not getting enough of a thorough inspection, right? So that's one of the first things you want to do if you're buying investment property. Don't skip that step. Forgetting to calculate the annual vacancy rate on a rental property. So people invest in things inside the retirement account because they want a return on investment. They want to grow their retirement account. Within a retirement account, you have a lot of options on what you can invest in. Rental properties is just one of them, or real estate is just one of them. And so when people are deciding what they want to invest in, you want to calculate what your expected rate of return and compare it to what other potential investment options are, like the stock market, right? So when calculating what their expected rate of return is, they sometimes forget to calculate in or incorporate into it what the amount of time that it might stay vacant whenever a tenant moves out, right? So be aware of that. The cost of a property manager. When you have an IRA own in a rental property, you're not required to have a property manager. It's not mandatory, but it is encouraged. We highly encourage it because of the rules around prohibited transaction, that it keeps a certain distance from you as the account holder of doing something that's considered a prohibited transaction. So again, when you're calculating your rate of return, don't forget to take into account the cost that the expenses that you're going to incur, because you're going to have rental income minus expenses. And then whatever that net income, that's going to go back into your retirement account, and that's your return on investment. And so if you're debating the different types of investments you want to make, you want to accurately calculate what your expected rate of return is to determine whether this is investment you want to make. So you want to make sure you calculate all the various expenses that go into that. And then failing to buy all necessary insurance. The retirement account is the entity that owns the asset, which means it's the retirement account that has to be the insured, right? So you as a person aren't going to be the named insured. It's going to be the retirement account that gets named as the insured, okay? 3 mistakes investors make when purchasing an investment property. So that was in selecting it. When it comes to purchasing it, I mentioned that it's the retirement account that buys the property. So the name of the title holder on that property is not Bobby Sharma. It's the Entrust group for benefit of Bobby Sharma, IRA number, and then his account number, right? So the IRA is the entity that owns the investment. So when the purchase contract and all the closing documents and ultimately title on that property are all put together for the purchase, it has to show the IRA listed as the buyer. It has to show the IRA on all the closing documents, and the IRA ultimately is who holds title on that, which means the rental income doesn't go to you. The rental income goes to the retirement account. It comes to Entrust to be deposited into your retirement account. Same thing with any expenses like property taxes, insurance, maintenance. You personally aren't writing the checks. It's the IRA that's going to pay those, right? The IRA owns the property. The IRA receives the income. The IRA pays the bills.
Hey, Bill, sorry to interrupt, but there's some background noise and it's pretty distracting. Can we ask you guys to mute, guys? Everybody make sure they're on mute. Sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Okay. You can hear me? Right. An earnest money deposit. So as I mentioned, all the expenses and income go into and out of the retirement account. If you have to put up earnest money deposit for the purchase, it's the retirement account that pays the earnest money deposit. So make sure that you're aware of that when you find a property. If you're using your IRA, you have to instruct your custodian to pay the earnest money. I will throw out there that if you find yourself in a situation where you don't have the account established, or you don't have the money in the account, or you're not prepared to send the money from the retirement account, you can put up the earnest money. And then once the retirement account has the money, then the earnest money comes from the retirement account, and you have to get reimbursed by whoever you gave the money to, right? By the escrow or title company or whatever it is, okay? But the earnest money, just like everything else, has to be paid by the retirement account. Ignoring the self-benefit rule. So this is where we're going to get a little bit into prohibited transactions. So the IRS has a rule in place that says any investment made by the IRA has to be purely for the benefit of the IRA. It's not for your personal benefit. The most obvious example of that is you can't buy property and use it for personal use. You can't buy property in your IRA and use it for personal use. It has to be for investment purposes only. That violates the self-benefit rule. We're going to expand a little bit beyond that. What exactly is a prohibited transaction? Simply, it's the improper use of your IRA or plan by the plan participant or a disqualified person. That's considered a prohibited transaction. So who's a disqualified person? You as the account holder, your spouse, your ancestors, so parents, grandparents, your lineal descendants, so children, grandchildren, any spouses of lineal descendants. So if you have kids who get married, they're considered disqualified persons, and then any fiduciaries. So potentially a lawyer or a CPA would also be considered a disqualified person, as would your custodian, whoever acts as your custodian potentially. So what that means, so again, a broader example, none of those people, your IRA is not allowed to purchase a property from any of those people. So if your parents have a property, or let's say a rental property, and you want to use your IRA to buy that from them and then keep it in your IRA, you can't, because your parents are a disqualified person. Your IRA can't buy from them. Your IRA can't sell a property to a disqualified person. You have a property in your IRA and your kids need a property and you want to sell that to them, you can't. Your kids are disqualified persons. Disqualified persons are also not allowed to do any sweat equity on a property, no physical labor, which means if your IRA owns a property, then you can't cut the grass, can't paint it, can't redo the kitchen, you can't do physical labor on it, right? Which is where you get into it's encouraged for you to have a property manager because if you're managing the property yourself, depending upon the amount of effort and time that goes into managing the property. It's one thing if you have like a home that your IRA owns and like once a year or two, you have to put an ad on Craigslist and show the property to a few people. It's another thing if your IRA owns some like major apartment building where you're putting in daily work associated with it. One would not probably be considered a prohibited transaction. The other probably would. But again, those are considered disqualified persons.
Hey, Bill, quick question. Can you have disqualified persons as tenants?
No, a disqualified person is not allowed to use the property for personal use, which means you can't rent it to them. They can't stay there for free. So for example, you're a parent, you have a kid going off to college and you decide, oh, I'm going to use my IRA and buy property there and let my kids stay there. And then maybe they can get roommates and blah, blah, blah. That's not allowed. The child is considered a disqualified person, is not allowed to use it. Violates the self-benefit rule. That self-benefit goes beyond just you as the account holder. It goes to the other people who are considered disqualified persons. Okay, so here are some examples of prohibited transactions. I gave you a few. Borrowing money from a disqualified person. Your IRA can borrow money. There are financial institutions that will lend money to your retirement account to buy a property. If you want to buy a property and you have $100,000 and you want to buy a property with $200,000, there are financial institutions that will lend the money, or your IRA can borrow money from, an associate or a friend, or even a non-disqualified third party like a sibling or a cousin. But it's not allowed to borrow money from a disqualified person. So you can't lend money to your IRA, and your IRA can't lend money to you. And your IRA can't lend money to your kids or to your parents, and they can't lend money to your IRA, right? That's considered a prohibited transaction. I mentioned this when selling a property to a disqualified person. Your IRA owns the property. If you decide you don't want it anymore, you want to get cash on it, you can sell it, but you can't sell it to a disqualified person. If you want the property personally, like if you and your IRA owns a property and you decide, like let's say you bought a property in, I don't know, Costa Rica inside your IRA, and you decide, I want to move to it, I want to retire to this property in Costa Rica, you can do that. You just have to take the property as a distribution. You have it distributed to you, and then whatever the fair market value is on it, you either have to pay taxes on it if it's in a traditional IRA, or it's tax-free if it's in a Roth IRA. But it becomes a distribution that is potentially subject to the tax of the distribution.
Another quick question, Bill. Sorry to keep cutting in, but
no worries.
I think I've read once upon a time that you can't even get a standard loan on a property that you purchased with an IRA.
It has to be a non-recourse loan, which means that the only recourse the lender has, you can't put any personal guarantees or any personal collateral up. And the only recourse the lender has, the loan is to the IRA, and the only recourse the lender has in the event of default is to foreclose on the property. They can't go after you personally. They can't go after any other assets in your IRA. So for that reason, there's a fairly limited number of financial institutions that are willing to do non-recourse loans to IRAs. And also typically they're gonna want a higher amount down, usually 30 or 40%, right? So that's really the only difference. I mean, you're not going to get an FHA loan or anything like that. It becomes, I mean, it's going to become a portfolio loan for the lender. We have a list of lenders on our website that do non-recourse loans to IRA. So there are banks, there are financial institutions that do this. You personally are not allowed to go to a bank, then take out a loan and use your IRA as collateral, or an asset inside your IRA as collateral, because you're the beneficiary of the IRA, but the IRA owns the property. So if you went to a bank and said, I want to borrow $50,000 and I want to put this IRA property up as collateral, they're not allowed to use that as collateral. Again, because you don't own the property, the retirement account owns the property. So there may be financial institutions that want to see what your balance is in your IRA in terms of knowing your potential ability to pay them a loan back, but it's not allowed to be collateral. They can't go in and have any legal recourse to take money out of your retirement account. Only the IRS can do that. The IRS can do that, unfortunately. Buying property for personal use. I already mentioned that one. That's not allowed. And then this one goes outside the IRA thing, but investing in a company that's owned by a disqualified person. So I mentioned earlier, you can invest in private companies, but you can't invest in a private company that's owned by a disqualified person. So if you wanted to start a business and your parents wanted to use their IRA to invest with you, they're not allowed. You're a disqualified person, so your company would be considered a disqualified entity for an IRA to invest in. All right. What are the reasons to invest in real estate inside your IRA? Well, if you know real estate, it gives you the opportunity to invest in an asset class that you know best. It's really as simple as that. A self-directed IRA gives you the flexibility to invest in real estate, as opposed to what most people consider a traditional retirement account with a traditional bank or brokerage firm like Merrill Lynch, Charles Schwab. They're not willing to hold real estate as an asset inside the retirement account. I've got the next two right after the other. Diversify your portfolio, right? So this gives you an opportunity to not just be limited to stocks, bonds, and mutual funds and having your whole entire, you have an account with Merrill Lynch and they have an advisor that says, I recommend you do this fund and this fund and this fund and maybe this company stock. And they say, look, you're really well diversified because that's a small cap fund and that's a large cap fund and that's an international fund and blah, blah, blah. But yet all the investments are still largely invested in equities and publicly traded stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. So when the market goes up, they all go up, maybe at different percentages. When the market goes down, they all go down, maybe at different percentages. Whereas if you hold some in stocks and mutual funds, some in real estate, maybe some in precious metals, some crypto, whatever it is that you're into, a self-directed IRA gives you the flexibility to do that. And then your investment, your real estate, so if you're owning a rental property, the rental income gets paid to the retirement account. Any appreciation is happening inside the retirement account. There's no capital gains that you have to pay taxes on. There's nothing you have to report on your annual filing when you pay your taxes. You're simply growing your retirement account. It gives you the flexibility to use real estate as an asset to grow your retirement account. So what do you need to do? Simply just open an account with a self-directed custodian, hopefully Entrust. That takes about 10 minutes to do through the online portal. You fund your account, either transfer or roll over money from an existing IRA or 401k, or you make an annual contribution. And then finally, you instruct Entrust to purchase whatever asset it is that you want to purchase. And then you submit the investment documents to us, the purchase contract, the closing documents, and then we process the investment. We send the money to the seller or to escrow, the title company, everything per your instructions. Once it closes, your IRA now owns that property. And again, the IRA receives all the rent, the IRA pays all the bills.
So there's a limit to how much you can actually fund yourself, right? But unless it's a rollover.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, these are retirement accounts. They're traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs, SEP IRAs, 401ks that are subject to the same contribution rules that you would have with a traditional IRA, Roth IRA with a traditional brokerage firm. So there are annual contribution limits based on the type of account you have and what your income is. But in terms of moving money between custodians, if you worked for a company for 20 years and you had a 401k and the company was contributing and you were contributing and you grew it and you grew it and you grew it and you've got, I don't know, $1 million in there, you could roll that whole entire amount over to an IRA with Entrust and invest it. You could roll 100,000 of that and leave the other 900,000 with a 401k and use that to invest. It's once you leave that company, you're free to do what you want. But you're right, like you can't just like open a Roth IRA and say, okay, I'm going to make a contribution of $100,000 to a Roth, because there's contribution limits, right? There's maximum contributions you're allowed to make.
Okay, you guys, you sent me a couple questions in the chat. I don't know if you would prefer to unmute yourselves and ask, or I can read them off. Go ahead and speak up. If I don't hear you speak up, I'll ask on your behalf. Bobby, are they able to unmute?
Bill, I have a question.
Yeah.
If I was to transfer 100,000 into a self-directed IRA and bought a $100,000 house, rental house someplace, could you talk about what the annual costs to Entrust for handling that for me?
Yeah, I mean, we have to open the account, we typically charge $50 to open the account, but you know, Bobby's referrals get that waived. We have a one-time transaction fee to process your investment, which is $175. That's our transaction fee to process an investment into real estate. It's $95 to process into non-real estate. Again, that's a one-time fee. And then we have an annual record-keeping fee where we actually give you two choices, either a fixed per asset fee or a fee based on the value of the account. Your ongoing fee to Entrust would be $299 a year. That's our flat per asset fee. So property for $100,000, a property for $1 million, it's still one property, it's one asset, it's a flat fee, $299 a year. We bill it quarterly, so you would pay us $74.75 per quarter. But I mean, that's the fee that you're looking at is basically $300 a year is the ongoing fee you'd have to pay.
Okay, thank you.
And I know those are hypothetical numbers, but he brought up a good point by using the number 100 and 100. So if you fund $100,000 and the purchase price is $100,000,
yeah,
I want to talk about the penalties behind other expenses that don't come from that account.
Yeah. No, I mean, expenses have to come from the account, right? So if you, like, yeah, let's say you used every last dollar to pay for a property and you're not getting rental income coming in and all of a sudden you got a property tax bill to pay, the IRA has to pay the bill. And not just any IRA, like you can't send the bill to Merrill Lynch and say, pay it from this IRA. It has to be from your Entrust IRA because your Entrust IRA is the one that owns the property. So you have to get money into the account and then instruct us to pay the bill. So, I mean, most people are holding rent, you know, real estate, they're getting rental income that's coming in, right? And so if they pay, you know, spend $100,000 on a turnkey rental that's already rented out, then you're going to start getting rental income coming in right away. But if you find yourself in a situation where you spend $100,000 and it needs $20,000 worth of maintenance, you know, and fixing it up, well, you got to get $20,000 into your IRA to pay for it. And there's only a few ways you can do that. You can roll over or transfer more money if you have another retirement account to roll over or transfer from, or you can make an annual contribution, assuming that you have the type of account and the income and the cash in your savings to be able to make that contribution. Or three, as I mentioned, the IRA can borrow money. If you need $20,000 to pay for a roof or something like that you didn't expect, and you don't have the ability to contribute it, and you don't have any more money in any other IRA, then you got to find somebody to lend that money. Now, it can be a bank, or it can be any non-disqualified third party. If you have somebody in your life who's not a disqualified person, not yourself or your parents or your kids or your spouse, so it could be a sibling, it could be a cousin, it could be a friend, but the IRA can borrow money. You'd have to draw up a promissory note, and the IRA, the lender would send the money to the IRA would pay the bill, and then the IRA would have to pay the loan back.
I have a question.
Okay.
If you are close to 65 to 70 and then you're owning this property in your IRA, then the distribution timing comes, then you have to liquidate the whole asset and then take the distributions. What happens? How long are you allowed to hold the property in your account?
That's a great question. So one of the biggest sort of concerns or issues that people potentially face with a self-directed retirement account is the fact that it typically holds illiquid assets, right? So when you have an account with a brokerage firm, you're holding stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, and you need to liquidate into cash, it takes usually a couple days to sell those assets, but it doesn't necessarily, and you can also decide you only want to sell 25% of a fund that you hold. It's tough to sell, 5%, 10% of a property if you need to take it as a distribution. So there's a couple of different things that you can do. First of all, you're subject to required minimum distribution at age 72, right? So prior to age 72, you don't have to take a distribution if you don't want to, right? If prior to 72, you want to take a distribution and let's say you hit age 72, you're now subject to required minimum distribution and you don't have the cash in your account to take the distribution, you can take an asset or a percentage of an asset as a distribution. So I'm going to throw out some numbers. You have a property worth $100,000. You have your first year, you're subject to a required minimum distribution. Let's say that required minimum distribution, which is actually about 3.5%. So you have to take $3,500. You don't have cash inside your retirement account to take the distribution. You can take 3.5% of your property as a distribution, which means you have to change title on the property. You have to do a quitclaim deed or some kind of, whatever paperwork to now make it so that your IRA owns 96.5% of the property, and now you personally own 3.5% of the property, right? So that is the thing that you're allowed to do. But if you're in a situation where you're you're 62, you're 63, and you need cash, and you don't have a lot of cash in your IRA, you need more than that's in there, then yes, your options are you find a partner who's willing to buy out 10%, 20%, 30%, whatever amount of cash that you need of your property, or you have to liquidate the whole property and turn it into cash. But again, I'm going to repeat, you don't have to liquidate a property to take it as a distribution. You can take a property as a distribution, or you can even just take a percentage of a property as a distribution in order to meet the required minimum distribution rules. Now, it would still be a distribution at whatever the value is, which means you're subject to the tax consequences of it. So you'd still have to pay taxes on whatever the distribution is, but it's not like if you don't have cash, you go well, I can't take a distribution. You still can take a distribution. And that's not just with property. To be honest with you, if you had Apple stock, for example, in your retirement account, and you wanted to take some of your Apple stock as a distribution, you're allowed. Nobody says that you have to sell it and take cash and then turn around and buy it. Now, that being said, it's easy to sell and turn around and buy it. It's a lot harder to sell and turn around and rebuy the property, right? So that's why not many people do it with a stock or mutual fund, but that doesn't change the fact that theoretically, if you didn't want to sell a mutual fund or you didn't want to sell a stock that's held in your retirement account, you could simply request to have it distributed to you as an in-kind distribution, and they just distribute the stock to you.
So what would be the tax base? If I bought Apple at 80 and now it's 1,000 and
there is no base. You're taxed at whatever the value is that it's distributed to you at. So if you request Apple stock, so you don't request a number of shares to be distributed to you. You request a value. You request $10,000 worth of Apple stock, and then they calculate how many shares that is, and then distribute you to your. So you pay taxes on $10,000. Whatever the value that's distributed to you is what you pay taxes on.
Okay.
When you buy a personal investment outside a retirement account and then you turn around and sell it, that's capital gains tax. So you need a basis, and then you need to know what it sells at, and then you pay the capital gains tax on the in-between. With the retirement account, when you made the contribution to the retirement account, you didn't pay taxes on that. So everything that happens in that, it's tax deferred, and then whatever gets distributed to you, it's not capital gains tax, it's income tax. That gets reported as taxable income. So you pay taxes on the full value because you never paid taxes on it. You never paid taxes on the contribution. You never paid taxes on the earnings. It's all been sheltered the whole entire time it's inside the retirement account.
Unless it's a Roth.
Unless it's a Roth, then that's a tax-free, right? Yeah. But you paid taxes when you made the contribution, right? So you made a post-tax contribution, and then all the earnings grow tax-free as long as you've had a Roth for at least 5 years and you're over 59.5 when you take the distribution. Yeah, then whatever distribution you take, it's completely tax-free because that's how Roth IRAs work.
Thank you.
Sure.
DC, did you still want to ask your question?
No, it's been answered actually. He explained
Okay.
The benefit of the IRA. Thank you.
And what about your the question about the 401k that you withdrew?
Okay, so for the 401k, I think I understand. I think I would either have to put it back in there or just start another one and roll it over that way, because otherwise it would be taking my personal money and, or maybe I could. So basically I withdrew my 401k instead of rolling it over into an into a self-directed IRA. And since I've already done the withdrawal, I was trying to figure out, could I still use it for real estate? Could I still park it in the real estate? Or would I need to put it back into basically the 401k? Because I took the 401k out under the CARES Act. So for 3 years, there's no penalties or anything. But now I'm trying, and I pretty much took it out for the purpose of real estate. So I'm trying to figure out, is it better to put it back and then roll it over, or just use it for the real estate?
Well, I mean, I'm going to start this off by saying, I'm going to explain some of the rules associated with it in terms of like, what should you do? You would probably want to talk to a CPA about that, but I'm going to talk about what your options are, right? So when you take a withdrawal from standard rules, let's take the CARES out of the picture for a second here. With a 401k or any retirement account for that matter, when you take a withdrawal, you have 60 days to roll it back into another retirement account to avoid any tax consequences, right? So if you've withdrawn it, you can roll it in as long as it's within 60 days and there's no tax consequences to it. Typically, once you get past the 60 days, you're shit out of luck. You now have to pay taxes on whatever you withdrew. The CARES Act changed that, and where it said you can withdraw up to $100,000 and you have 3 years to pay that back. So instead of 60 days, they've essentially said, pay that back within 3 years and you're not going to have any tax consequences associated with that. Now, I actually was talking to a CPA earlier today because I was asking them, how are they actually handling that? Like, are they going to take the taxes and then as you pay it back, you get your taxes paid back? Or are they going to like wait until the end of 3 years and then decide to tax you at that point? And actually, I don't think he knew. Like, I don't know that that's been determined yet, how exactly that's going to happen. But in effect, like, to answer your question, what should you do? I mean, you at this point have the option, even if you're outside the 60 days because of the CARES Act, you can put the money back in, decide to roll it over into an IRA and invest in real estate if you want. If you decide that you want to invest in real estate and, plan on paying it back within 3 years, you can do that. But understand one thing, you have to pay back in whatever you took out. So if you withdrew cash, you can't pay it back by throwing a property into it, right? You have to pay cash back. Okay, so just bear that in mind, that if you want to say, okay, I'm going to buy a property and then I'm going to pay it all back within 3 years, once you're getting close to that 3 year point, if you're still holding this property and you don't want to sell the property, then you better have the cash to just pay it back or be able to borrow against that property or do something like that, because you can't put the property, like you can't all of a sudden say, okay, I want to keep this property. I'm going to roll I withdrew cash, but I want to roll this over into an IRA. You can't do that, right? You have to roll over. You'd have to put the cash back, roll over the cash, and then go buy the property inside an IRA to keep it tax sheltered the whole entire time.
Arnab has a question online. He wants to know if he can use his IRA to form an LLP with his friends, buy real estate, and can he be a managing member?
Yes. So you wouldn't be a managing member, you would be a manager. So it's usually an LLC. You said LLP. I don't know if that was a typo, but I mean, you could do a limited partnership, I guess, or typically it's structured as an LLC where, in particular, when you're partnering with other investors, my whole explanation, my whole presentation was about your IRA holding direct title on a property, but you could create a structure where instead of your IRA owning the property, your IRA owns an LLC and the LLC owns the property. And you can partner into that LLC with other investors and you could be the manager. You wouldn't be the managing member because you wouldn't be the member. The IRA is the member, right? Your IRA is the entity that would be the owner of the property. And unless you're using personal funds along with the IRA, you wouldn't be a member. You would simply establish yourself as the manager. And you're allowed to be the manager, but you can't compensate yourself, right? So when you draw up the LLC operating agreement, you name your IRA as the member and you name the other people as members or other IRAs as members. And then you can assign a person who's the responsible party, who's the manager. And that can be the person who establishes the bank account, who has check writing authority, who makes the investment decisions and blah, blah, blah. And that's all allowed up until the moment that you create some kind of compensation within the operating agreement says the manager is going to be paid some kind of like stipend or salary or something like that. As the account holder, as the disqualified person, you're not allowed to receive personal compensation.
I have another question regarding selling the property. So it's good or it's advantageous to buy this property ASAP into an IRA so the income accumulates for the distribution later. Otherwise, if you have to sell, then that particular year you will be, I mean, you have this 100% of assets liquidated and then.
Well, yeah, I mean, in your scenario, again, with like the 3 years, like the $100,000 or because that's the max you can take, right? I don't know how much you took, but like the max that you can do under this 3-year CARES Act thing is $100,000.
No, I didn't do CARES Act. I have a fresh IRA invested in stocks and I want to liquidate and buy assets. But I'm 63 and I'm worried about the distribution. So at those years, so the income should accumulate. So I have to take the distributions out of the income.
Yeah. I mean, you have 9 years before you're required to take distribution. So bear that in mind. I mean, because it used to be 70.5 and effective this year, they changed it to 72. Whether you would need distributions, like that's your own personal thing. But bear in mind, you do have 9 years before the IRS says you must start taking distributions. And then again, at that point, you can take a percentage of the property as an in-kind distribution if you choose to.
Thank you.
Hey, Bill, I've got a question. So with regard to buying a rental property using an IRA, could you speak to what the custodian's roles are and what the IRA account holder role is?
Yeah, well, so for a retirement account to qualify as a retirement account, it requires a financial institution for you to hold. It's basically a trust, right? So when you establish a trust, there is a trustee. And then there are beneficiaries. And so the IRA is essentially, that's what it is. An IRA is a type of trust where we're not technically a trustee because we're not a fiduciary, we don't give advice, but we are the custodian where we have to hold the cash, we have to hold the assets. And then you as the account holder, you're the beneficiary of the account, but in a self-directed IRA, you're also the decision maker. You decide what you want to invest in. You do all the due diligence. You're the one who has to we're not going to do any due diligence on any investment you want to make. If you want to invest in a rental property and you have to go and find the property, and then if you rent it out, we're not going to make sure that your rent's getting paid. You have to do that. So you as the account holder have all of the responsibility in terms of deciding what you want to invest in and managing those assets and taking care of it and making sure that you're getting the value that you want. Our requirement as custodian is to be the custodian, so to hold title on the assets on behalf of your IRA. We do annual reporting to the IRS. You have online access to your account to see statements. We track all the transactions, so we do the record keeping. The rental income has to come into us. We record keep that. Any bills that go out, we pay the bills. We record keep that. So you can log into your account and you can see all the transactions. In the event that you are ever subject to an audit, we have all the, reports that we would provide to you to be able to if you were ever audited for any reason or the IRS needed any documents. But largely our biggest role is, in order for a retirement account to qualify as a retirement account, simply it requires a financial institution, either a bank or a trust company, to hold possession, to hold title on the assets on behalf of the IRA. When you have an account with Charles Schwab or Merrill Lynch and you're invested in Apple stock, you don't own the Apple stock. Your account owns the Apple stock. So the same way that your property is held by the Entrust Group, FBO, your name and account number, that Apple stock is actually held by Charles Schwab, FBO, your name and account number. But you don't see that because it's all publicly traded. It's just they're pressing button and it's all computer traded. So you don't see that. But technically, that's how it's held. It's not held by you as a person. So the same thing applies with a self-directed IRA.
Right. So when a property manager contacts the owner and says, we have an issue at the property, we need your quick response and we need a quick payment because the payment needs to be made very quickly, who actually writes the check? The IRA account holder actually has to contact the custodian and say, hey, could you please write a check to this property management company or this contractor so that the work can get started right away?
That's exactly right. Unless you structure it through an LLC. If you want to have your own checkbook control, then instead of having your IRA hold direct title, set it up through an LLC where you become the manager of the LLC and you have checkbook control of the LLC if you really want that. But yeah, and it's not like we all have a process for audit trail purposes where you have to submit the invoice to us. We have a form called a payment authorization form, which you can log into your account and you can just request to have an invoice paid. But for audit trail purposes, we have to have we can't just pay an invoice. You have to instruct us because we are subject to regulatory audits and they will come in and they will pull 100 accounts and they're going to see all the transactions that were done and they're going to look and make sure that we have documented evidence that we received that instruction from you. So everything that happens in your account, we need your instructions, which is either completing a form or logging into your account, which creates a digital record of it and instructing us through the online process, through the online portal. But yes, in short, you need a bill paid, you send us the bill and instruct us to pay it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Wow, that was a lot of information, Bill. Great information. Hopefully very useful to many of you. Avoid the traps. This is a highly regulated process. So knowing what you're doing in your self-directed IRA and partnerships is very important. So thank you for that insight. Yana, any other questions from you online on Facebook or here?
I don't know if anyone has any more other questions for Josh. We wanted to open it back up for additional Q&A if you missed your opportunity. I know there was one question that came from Facebook for Josh that asked if Skylight performs all the work or if they sub it out. I kind of answered for you because I believe you sub it out when you need to.
No, they don't.
We actually don't. Yeah. So.
Oh, you don't? Oh,
yeah,
well, let me respond to that.
We do all of our work in-house.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm confusing you with James, the guy we were talking to yesterday.
All good. Yeah, we find that that's important because we do control the full stack, right? From design to planning, sourcing, construction. And we talked a lot about Apple stock, but like Apple's products, their philosophy is you have to control everything to make sure that it's the way you want it to be. And we find that helps projects be more predictable if we control every part of the planning and execution.
Now I know.
Very good.
I do have a quick question for Bill. And that is, if we buy a property inside the Entrust IRA, self-directed, who signs the documents at closing?
Entrust. Yeah, so we're as the custodian and record keeper of your, I'm sorry, somebody had sent me a question. I was just finishing typing to them.
Okay.
Since the IRA owns the property and we're the custodian of the IRA, we have to review and sign the paperwork. But we actually have a process in place where we ask you to provide what's called your read and approved signature. So in effect, we both sign the documents because we as a policy ask you to, but legally, we sign on behalf of the IRA. So we ask for your signature kind of off in the margins, just to, again, it's just a business thing that we do. But on the signature line of the name of the title holder and investor of the property, it's going to be the Entrust Group, FBO, for benefit of is what that stands for, your name and account number. And the custodian has to sign those documents on behalf of the IRA.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
I had a question for Josh.
Sure.
In terms of going through the rehab process, is it common for a property owner to hold retainer on a GC during the construction period?
To hold retainer on a GC, you could mean a couple of things by that. Can you just clarify, please?
Yeah, so if, let's say I was having work done on a house that I just purchased, and for the kitchen phase, I wanted to do like a retainer to ensure that the GC is completing the work. Is that something that typically happens?
Got it. Yeah, so it's not an unreasonable ask. That becomes a business negotiation effectively. What I'll say is a few things. Actually, let me say a few things about payment terms for construction and renovation. So to address your question directly, we do, as Skylight, typically hold about 6% of the project value until the very, very, very end, the punch list being completed. So that's sort of out of every invoice we hold back. Sorry, we have the client hold back a little bit so that we don't have a bad incentive at the end where we've gotten all the money and they want us to come do a few things. We want to make sure that we're only paid everything, the final payment when everything is done. So it is not uncommon, right? It could be 5%, it could be 10%. Some contractors might not accept that. They should, in our opinion. The other thing is that it's not uncommon to be asked for a big deposit when you sign the contract. And I'll just point out that the California law about this is pretty clear that you can't request a deposit of more than $1,000 on a renovation project. That's a pretty small amount relative to the value of an entire renovation, but that is the rule. And so a lot of people choose to not operate by that, but it's just helpful as a customer to know what the rules are, and you can decide how much of a stickler you want to be for them or not.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, I think we're good. I'm sure we'll do this again. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate your time and all the attendees who joined. Hopefully this was very useful. I know you have some questions. Reach out to Bill, reach out to Josh, reach out to us. We'll connect you. And then Josh, if you can send me the slide deck and the cheat sheet.
Yeah.
Several people are asking for that, but we'll get that squared away. So
I do have one quick question.
Yes.
Sure.
This has been such a informative session. Will this recording be available?
Yes.
Later?
Yes. Yeah. Gene, if you reach out to Yana or myself, we're recording it. We'll post it on our YouTube channel. It takes about a day to get all that done, but if you shoot me or
it's on the Facebook group now, and it'll be on YouTube always too.
Yep.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you, Gene. If you liked it, tell your friends, tell your colleagues about our group, and participate and suggest ideas. We're here to help the community. We want the community to not make mistakes. We want the community to do well in real estate, especially right now. So that's what we're here for. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Bill. Thanks, Josh. Take care. Thanks, Yana.
Thanks,
Thank
Bobby.
you, guys.
Always a
Have
pleasure.
a good night.
See you next time. Okay.
Oh,
You guys.